We mark this evening a solemn anniversary. It has been 60 years this week since President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. That moment in history has had profound echoes across the decades. One could argue as a singular event, it was one of the most significant and history-changing events of the last 150 years. It has certainly been among the most researched and studied. Tonight, we will have the privilege of hearing from a very special individual who lived through those dark days of 1963 and whose life was forever altered by the events of that day. We also mark this evening the 10th anniversary of the opening of the Ruth Paine House as a museum and historic site. On the National Register of Historic Places, the house was restored with incredible attention to detail in a project led by Shirley Smith and Kevin Kendrow, who are in the audience this evening. Thank you. Ruth Paine was also a tremendous help throughout the restoration process, providing her time, her memories, knowledge, and photographs to help ensure a restoration that was as close as possible to how the home appeared 60 years ago. Thank you, Ruth. As many of you know, the house is now open as a museum that tells the story of how two young mothers got caught up in the whirlwind surrounding the assassination of President Kennedy. This unique female perspective is not part of the history that normally gets told. It is an incredible honor to be caretakers of this history, and we thank all of you for supporting our preservation efforts through purchasing a ticket to this special evening. A few housekeeping items. We hope to have some time for Q&A at the end of the program. In your program this evening, you will find a QR code that will take you to a short form where you can submit questions, and we strongly encourage you to submit questions through the form. We do also have index cards out just outside of the doors at the usher tables if you would prefer to submit a question via paper, and we will collect those at the end of the talk portion. While we don't expect to be able to get to all the questions this evening, we will do our best to compile and cover the range of topics that may get asked. After the program, we will have an opportunity for book signing by Thomas Mallon and Ruth Paine, and that will occur in the library outside of the theater. Thank you all for coming this evening. And now for our featured speakers. Thomas Mallon is an accomplished author with 11 books of fiction, including Henry and Clara, Fellow Travelers, Watergate, and the just-published Up with the Sun. He has also written volumes of nonfiction about plagiarism, diaries, letters, and the Kennedy assassination, Mrs. Paine's Garage, which you can purchase in the lobby this evening. His works appear in The New Yorker, the New York Times Book Review, and other publications. He received his PhD in English and American Literature from Harvard University and taught for a number of years at Vassar. His honors include Guggenheim and Rockefeller Fellowships, and he has been literary editor of Gentleman's Quarterly and deputy chairman of the National Endowment for the Humanities. And in 2012, he was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. An 8-part dramatic adaptation of his novel, Fellow Travelers, is airing this fall on Showtime Paramount+. He is Professor Emeritus of English at the George Washington University and lives in Washington, D.C. Ruth Paine lived in Irving from 1959 until 1970, and I will not go into great detail about that because we will have that conversation this evening. She is the mother of 2 children, Chris and Lynn. Ruth embraced Quakerism at the age of 14, and one can see the influence of Quaker values in Ruth's lifelong efforts for social justice and her community activism. After 1963, Ruth became active in the West Irving Improvement Association, a civil rights group working to integrate Irving city facilities and schools, as well as improve the lives of residents in the community of Bear Creek, an African-American community that was annexed by Irving in 1969. Ruth helped establish and taught in the area's first integrated school, which was based on the Montessori principles of education. After leaving Irving in 1970, Ruth briefly moved to Philadelphia, where she was principal of a Quaker school, and then to Florida, where she completed a master's degree in psychology. In Florida, she was a school advisor and a psychologist for most of her career, and she now resides in Santa Rosa, California. Please join me in welcoming our 2 distinguished guests.
That's it? All right. Well, you look like a very fine crowd. How is the volume and the sound? Is it clear? A little more volume? Okay, speak up. Well, of course, you understand that the Kennedy assassination had a huge impact on me and our lives here. And she missed a little piece in the middle there. When I left Irving, I got a job as a principal of a Quaker school. And I was there for 4 years. And I had been very active with Quakers, and that was influential in my having thought, well, it's a Cold War. What do? We're supposed to talk to our enemies. Let's try to communicate with Russians and so on. So I was busy doing that. But we'll get to that story in a minute. First, I want to tell you how I met this man, who called me one time and told me all the things he printed and his writing, and that was impressive. But he ended saying that he'd written a book about Clara, who was in the box when Lincoln was shot. And I thought, I don't want to go there. It's bad enough that I knew Lee Oswald at all. But we recovered from that. And then he wrote a book that's been very helpful. And how many of you have had a chance to read Mrs. Paine's Garage? Oh, you've got work ahead. Yeah. And there'll be a chance here to get some. It's so readable. And what surprised me when it came out is he also spoke to the issues of the plots and the conspiracy and all this that has gone on. And my experience was so clear as to what happened, that it was Lee and that he acted alone. So that's certainly being said now, and is being said more, I think. And there's a great group of here, raise your hand, group, who watches the internet and makes it behave itself as to what is true and not true. Thank you.
Well, Ruth and I had sort of one of those long journalistic courtships. My initial pitch was clearly not successful by mentioning Henry and Clara, but we stayed in touch, and we had interesting conversations, and I always sort of hoped that maybe she was keeping the door open. And about 3 or 4 years passed, and then in the summer of 1999, she called me up when I was living in Connecticut in those days, and said that she thought she might be ready to do this. There was a reporter, I think in St. Petersburg, who wanted to do a longish newspaper piece, and I sort of leapt in and I said, you know, Ruth, this is going to be an ordeal for you to bring up all of this, relive all of this with a lot of detail. And if you're going to do it, I think I just brazenly said, I think you should do it right. And I said, I know I can do this for the New Yorker, and a large portion of the book, Mrs. Paine's Garage, ran in the New Yorker originally. And if it's worth doing at all, you know, you might as well put yourself through it for that. So, and just the one thing I want to say about our interviews, the first thing I did, I dropped everything. I was writing a novel, but I thought before she changes her mind, I'm going to go down, and we did interviews day after day for a week. And Ruth was a wonderful subject, not merely because she had a tremendously interesting story, although even there, I had to convince you, in a sense. You would say, I've done my level best over the years to tell the facts as I know them. To the Warren Commission, you'd spoken to nonfiction writers about the assassination. What I wanted was something different. I was interested, to a great extent, in the impact on Ruth personally. And being Ruth, she was, well, I don't know if I should be, you know, center stage for it. And I said, I think your story is very interesting, how somebody survives something like that with, you know, the grace that you did. And so once that part of her reluctance was over, I feared it might be the kind of subject, because she had been reluctant, where she would say every 10 minutes, 15 minutes, well, we got to go off the record for that, or turn off your tape recorder, please, for that. And it was not like that at all. Once she committed to this, she was all in, and did all the interviews and helped point me to other people and other sources. And so it was a real mutual experience.
Yes. And a bonus I didn't expect, in the sense that there was now something written that I really respected, that I could give to somebody who says, tell me your story. I said, well, why don't you read this? So I didn't have to tell them the story. And that worked out very well.
Yeah.
It's still happening.
Why don't, could you, for the audience, situate yourself in 1963, at the time you first meet Lee and Marina Oswald?
Yeah, okay. You have to understand, my husband Michael and I had met and married in Pennsylvania, and then he got his first real job with Bell Labs in Hearst. I think that's where it is, yep. And we moved down to Texas. Meantime, I was quite pregnant. So my first job was to say, okay, where do I go find a pediatrician? Where do I find an obstetrician? What kind of hospital? What do I do? So my early time here in Irving was totally becoming a mother, and what was needed and what I needed to do. And it's warm here. And it's lovely. And we have a house, it still exists, I made a great museum, with no stairs at all. The children can go straight up to this fenced yard with a big, glorious oak tree and play there. And so Irving, the ambience really worked for us very well. But the marriage was having a lot of trouble. So Michael had moved to an apartment. In Texas at that time, you had to be separated for a full year before you could even file for divorce. So we were working on that. And we were about 8.5 months into that when the Kennedy assassination happened. And Michael came back, and I was really pleased for the support and to have him there. So it made a big difference. And then we tried again until for the next, most of the decade, to make it a marriage. And it was always a love story, but it never quite made it as a marriage. So 2 kids, good kids. One of them here to represent it. Yeah.
So I believe it was February 22nd, 1963, that you were invited, or well, you went to a party.
Yep.
At a friend named Everett Glover's, 9 months to the day before the assassination, and that was when you met Lee and Marina Oswald. And you were, from the start, and I would say certainly throughout the 9 months that followed, more interested in getting to know Marina than in getting to know Lee.
That's put mildly.
And tell me about how your relationship with her evolved during that period.
Well, at this gathering at the house, I spent my time with Marina in the bedroom. She really didn't know English well enough to understand what people were saying to each other, and certainly couldn't talk and participate. So I had been trying to learn Russian. I've told people the Quakers got me into this, because I was active in the Young Quakers group nationally, and we were very concerned about the Cold War. Picture the time. Time of the Cold War, and the Quakers were saying, you know, you're supposed to talk to your enemies. You don't just turn them out. You try to understand. So I was interested in learning Russian and kind of trying to bridge some of the ideological space between us. So that's how I got into Russian. And of course, here was a native Russian speaker who could very kindly explain things to me in the language and teach me things. And so it was a very useful thing, helpful for me to have time with Marina. And after that initial meeting, I went and visited at their apartment where they were in the Oak Cliff area, is that right, of Dallas. And then one time when I went, you had to arrange ahead because you had to write to make a date to come over. There was no phone. They did not have a phone. They couldn't afford a phone. Picture that. And here are all these people with little phones they carry around, poking all the time.
You had a party line in those days, didn't you, in the house? Even in nice yes. middle-class West 50. Yeah.
And just to cut in there, after the assassination, my phone was ringing off the hook. People called me. Finally, I called the phone company. I said who I was, and they said, "Oh, you want a line instead of a party line? You want a single line?" I said, No, that isn't the problem. I do have to do something so these other people can get to use the phone." Yeah. And she thought I wanted to not be listed, but no, I didn't mind if I was listed. That people should know they can find me. I thought it was too sinister to be hiding. I wanted people to know, I wanted people to be able to find me, and to speak to people who were really interested in following up and knowing things. Mm-hmm. So I got distracted there.
Yeah. It was a couple of months into your acquaintance and friendship with Marina that a major incident occurred that many people, as the decades go by, really appreciate insufficiently as something that helps to explain the assassination of the president. And that was Oswald's attempt in April of '63 to shoot General Edwin Walker. Edwin Walker was a hard right-wing, extreme anti-communist, segregationist, quite prominent in Dallas and nationally. Had been on the cover of Time magazine and so forth. And Oswald, we do have pictures to cue things up. This is Ruth with Michael and her daughter and son. It's a little blurry. They're
Can you see that?
Getting Christmas hats, I think. I think the next ones are clearer.
Needs more light.
There we are. This is the house on West 5th Street in Irving.
Still there.
And this is Leah and Marina and their eldest child, June. And I'm guessing, I think this is 1962,
Before they
right
came.
when they're coming back to America after Russia. But this is, this photograph and what's probably the next one. This is Oswald in the backyard of the house on Neely Street in Dallas, holding a rifle and a copy of the Daily Worker, and he's got his pistol at his waist. Marina took these photographs in the backyard at Neely Street, I think on March 31st, 1963. And about 10 days later, he used that rifle, which was the same rifle he would kill the president with, to shoot at General Walker. That's Edwin Walker. Mm-hmm. And Ruth, could you speak to why you think this is so key to understanding the assassination?
It certainly is. And I want to introduce another person who studied it at great length, Priscilla Johnson McMillan, who's known to both of us.
Yes.
Now passed on, but she described it as the Rosetta Stone to understand the attempt on the president, trying to kill the president, that knowing what was going on in his mind and how he plotted and did all the preparation for trying to shoot General Walker, said so much about his personality, his sense of being not recognized, and that he wanted to have notoriety, really. And this, I just bought this so she could be represented here too.
I think we have a picture of Priscilla. Further down.
Yes, thank you for sending it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is Priscilla in the middle with Ruth on the right and Michael on the left.
Oh yeah, and you took it.
Yes, that was in the backyard of Priscilla's house
Very nice.
shortly after the book was published.
Yeah, that was very
And
nice. And I do think that the shooting of Walker is absolutely crucial to understand what was going on with Oswald and what happened. And it hasn't been really said enough, not enough has been said about it. How many of you know that Oswald, most of you should because you're here, but how many of you know that Oswald tried to kill Edwin Walker in April? There you go, good crowd. Well, when Mrs. Paine's Garage came out, the book that was done right here by Thomas Mallon, I have a little list of the reviews that were made, and 13 reviews, only 4 mentioned the Oswald attempt to kill Walker. And, you know, it was well covered by the author. He wrote it up and he said what happened, and there it was in the book, Mrs. Paine's Garage. But only 4 mentioned it. One of those 4 got the date right. So you can see that it really wasn't as prominent in the public view as I felt it certainly should have been. So.
And he had gotten away from with it. The bullet had sort of grazed almost the top of Walker's head, the hair, and he got away on foot. He didn't drive a car, and he came home and was very pale. Marina describes him as being absolutely white. And he hid the rifle by the railroad tracks, but I think was amazed to get away with it. And so he was carrying that secret with him for many months. Marina knew, but nobody else knew. You certainly didn't know. And I think that had you known, he would not have been coming to your house in the fall of '63.
Marina knew that if she told me, things would happen.
Right.
So, yeah.
And there's one sort of footnote to that is, how did it finally come to light that he had shot Walker? The note that was sent.
When he went out to try to shoot Walker, he wrote a note for Marina. He just didn't say goodbye. He just went out in the evening, leaving her there. And then when he didn't come back, she looked in a little corner where he had some desk papers and saw this note. And it started out, here is the key to the post office box. Number 1. Number 11, after directions of things that she should do. If I am arrested, this is where the police station is. And she, of course, was frightened, terrified, didn't know what to do, didn't know who to tell. So she tried to threaten him, I'm going to hide this, and if you ever do anything crazy like this, I'll go to the police with it. And, but it didn't work, you know. But the amount of preparation that he did for trying to shoot Walker in no way is mimicked in the preparation he did before shooting Kennedy, because that was an impulse. He was working on a place that turned out to be on the parade route.
The parade route.
With the car going by. And he learned that when he was at work on Wednesday. Called and came and got a ride out to my house. He had never come out on a weekday. He had never come out without asking permission. This is very different, but I didn't know anything. But But indeed, he came out to get this rifle, which was hidden in my garage, which I did not know. And then got it and went in and shot the president, as we know. And then it was later, a little bit later, that the note came to light. What was that he wrote? And what happened was, when Oswald was shot, Marina was scarfed up by Secret Service to be sure she was all right, but also be sure where she was and what she was doing. And I was sending things to Marina, things for the children. Marina called and said, I need diapers, I need clothes for the babies. And she's got baby born just a month before, and a 3-year-old. What a situation for a young woman. And a husband in serious trouble, let's say. Well, I've lost my train of thought.
About how the note reached her.
Okay,
And
well, that's it. All right, I was packaging things to send to Marina, and about the third time I included a little book we had, a small book of advice to Russian mothers. I think we were reading about pinworms, something that Texas folks and people with small children know about. And it happened to be in the kitchen where we were reading, which made it different from the things that were in the garage where the Oswalds had things stored. The police had come and helped themselves. No warrant, I asked. They didn't have permission to take anything. But they filled their cars with things from the Oswald stuff in the garage. But they didn't get that note because it was in my kitchen. And I sent the book to Marina. And of course, what is a Secret Service man going to do when he sees a book? See what falls out. And out came this note, and she was confronted with this note. What is this? And had to explain that it was the note he wrote when he went out to try to shoot Walker. If that note had not been found, I don't think we ever would have found out, because she was not going to tell.
Mm-hmm. And yes, and if you had found out, had stumbled across that note,
I still didn't know what this note was about.
Very different things.
Yeah.
But November of 1963 comes, and you're a citizen, and you are grieving along with the rest of the country. In some ways, everybody, I was 12 at the time, but I remember the way people identified with the Kennedys were wrapped up with knowledge of the whole Klan and all of the different relationships and so forth. And you were a young mother with 2 children, as Mrs. Kennedy was, and you had the grief that everybody had. But at the same time, you had to go through the next year being the witness before the Warren Commission, whose testimony takes up more pages of the appendices, the 26 volumes of the report, than anybody else's.
Mine is more
Yours
than
is,
anybody
you are
else.
number 1 by my counts.
Volume.
And that was because you had seen so much of the Oswalds and knew things about their moods and movements and so forth. I'm wondering how you managed to put the private aspect of your grief and your life, how you managed to balance that with what you were being called upon to do in these investigations, because I think that would have broken a lot. I don't think it would have broken a lesser person.
Well, I had strong interest in truth, and I believed in our free speech and the newspapers and publishing what's known. And I felt that at least, what can I do to patch or to help make this less of such a tragedy? I can at least be open and tell people what I know and talk to the people who want to know. So that's basically what I did, and I felt called to do that. Still the heck goes on. I'm curious about when the balance of conspiracy theories to lone nut beliefs will balance or will change. Right now, I think it's about 50-50. And I frankly don't like to talk to the people who think it was that it was a conspiracy of some sort or complicated.
One of the reviewers in that binder, I remember, said that he or she, I can't remember, appreciated the book because it really found sort of the one bright figure in this whole terrible tragedy to talk about and to acquaint people with. And that, of course, was Ruth. And I have to say, the Warren Commission, which was very exhaustive, is much derided, certainly by conspiracy believers, but is always called upon as a resource by them, too. They always cite particulars from the Warren report, even when they're saying, you know, it was a whitewash. But I have to say that, if it's not too silly, my favorite moment in your testimony, which I read every page of course, came one day. You had appeared before the commission the day before, and you came in and you said, before we get started, I really feel there's one thing I want to correct from yesterday that I didn't tell you, that I was withholding. And you can imagine the staffers and these commissioners leaning forward. And what would that mean? She said, well, it involved when I was trying to teach Lee to drive. And you were with him going around, I think, a parking lot in Irving.
I usually drove him to a parking lot and so on. But this particular occasion, he had started the car and wanted to drive, and I let him on a public street. He didn't have a learning permit. My father is an insurance man. He would have had absolute fits. And I told him, don't do that again. We're not going to.
So the revelation was that he did not have a learner's permit to do this.
And still, I had let him drive.
I think if you want a sense of Ruth's veracity and a sense of the lengths she went to try to say exactly what happened, I think that's a good story for that. But all these years later, I mean, how do you feel the commission, that report, it still essentially holds up?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. They were very thorough, not only in Washington, but they came out to the House. They measured things. They looked for where were the curtain rods that Oswald said he had come out. Well, there were no curtain rods. And they asked good questions about the data.
Yeah. Can you describe what daily life was like in the period immediately after? I mean, you mentioned the phone ringing off the hook.
Right.
But,
and I got mail, and I was not good answering mail. Never been terribly good, but it just piled up. People sent checks. I did respond to that and send it on to Marina because it was a gift for her. There was really touching thoughtfulness on the part of the American public, I thought, saying this poor woman, alone in a country, does not speak the language, has two tiny little girls, and what does she have? So that there was, I appreciated the public response to Marina and to her needs. And
one thing too, that people, not everybody knows about Oswald was he was not a good husband. You didn't know that at the time, but he beat Marina. This is very well documented in Priscilla McMillan's book. And the other thing was that he never really wanted, you were going to improve your Russian by being with Marina, but he did not particularly want her learning English.
No, that's right. He didn't want her to speak with me, especially.
And
yes.
so her isolation and her fright, I think, are very understandable. And, it's easy to say that, well, when she got that note that he had tried to do this to Walker, she should have alerted people to it. But she was so isolated and frightened of what the consequences would
yes.
be. So we were talking in the green room just prior to coming out here tonight. We were talking about coincidences and conspiracy, and how coincidence in some ways is the enemy to the conspiracy mindset, because a conspiracy mindset does not really like to admit to coincidences. Coincidences tend to be looked upon as sinister. And I do think it's important to make a distinction between, there are many people who have dug into the Kennedy assassination and legitimately tried to discern whether there were larger patterns, some connections, whatever, have done legitimate research. But then there are those who extremely discount anything that just happened. Do you see, we live in an age, a lot of people will say now, in an age of misinformation, an age when technologically falsehoods are becoming easier and easier to proliferate and to extend. Do you see any connection between our time and that time, if only to say that some of the roots of our time might lie in that period?
Well, I don't know how to answer that. There's certainly a lot of people felt there had to be more story, and they're trying to figure it out, and some very sincerely. But what troubles me is, for instance, there's this new DVD out, Mrs. Paine's Garage and the Murder of John F. Kennedy. And, yeah.
The garage isn't in the title. I don't want to be associated. I think it's just Mrs. Paine and the assassination.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah.
No.
Is that it?
And the murder of John
And the murder,
Kennedy. I asked him, what do you think, what's your opinion about the attempt on Walker? And he says, well, I really don't think that happened. So that's how some of the plot people follow their stories. They just take what they want and leave the rest alone. And that's not good research.
Yeah, which is the way they pick and choose from the Warren Report.
Exactly.
Different facts.
Exactly.
And I think if I could tell it in 2 minutes, I would tell it. There's the story that I used in the book. I was mentioning this to you tonight too, of coincidence. Ruth and Michael had friends named Raymond and Ilsa Entenmann, friends from your Philadelphia days. And the Entenmanns moved down to Texas at roughly the same time that the Paines did. And Raymond Entenmann took a job at the Fort Worth Art Museum. And Raymond and Ilsa, his wife, spent election night, 1960, the night John Kennedy was elected to the presidency, at Ruth and Michael's house.
Celebrating at my house.
Celebrating.
We were a small group of people.
Kennedy did not sweep Irving in 1960. Well, 3 years later, when President Kennedy comes to Dallas, as many of you probably know, he spent the night prior to the assassination in Fort Worth. He was at the Hotel Texas in Fort Worth. The rivalry between the cities in those days was such that he flew from Fort Worth to Dallas.
Yeah.
But when they awoke, he and Mrs. Kennedy in the Hotel Texas that morning, she was looking at the paintings that had been installed on the walls of their hotel suite. And she said to the president, "Jack, it's real art." She thought it was just, hotel decoration. But in fact, they were paintings from the Fort Worth Art Museum. And there was a little brochure, a kind of mini catalog to this exhibition. And it had 5 names on it. And one of those names was Raymond Entenmann, because he had helped to put the paintings, select the paintings. And so Mrs. Kennedy or the president, one of them suggested to the other, we should call and thank them. And William Manchester, whose book, The Death of a President, is still key to understanding the assassination, I think, he says this was John F. Kennedy's last phone call, the last phone call that he made. And he made it to a woman that I tracked down, Ruth Carter Stevenson, who was the daughter of Amon Carter, who had basically funded a lot of the Fort Worth Museum. And he thanked her, and at the end of the conversation he said, please thank the others who had assembled the little exhibit, and one of them was Raymond Entenmann. So it took me about a month to put these pieces together, but what does this show? It shows that John F. Kennedy made his last phone call in part to thank a man who had spent the night of his election to the presidency in the house in which his assassin would wake up on November 22nd, 1963, and in whose garage the rifle would be kept. And what this proves is nothing. And that was the whole point of the story, that coincidences do happen, despite what conspirators want to believe, and really to get at the truth of a matter as enormous as the assassination, it takes people who believe in the truth. And I once asked you, did this define your life? And I remember what your answer said, no. You said it certainly influenced my life. It certainly had an enormous effect on it. Anybody would be mad to deny that. But I did not allow it to govern my life. And you lived a rich life doing many things, and innumerable good causes and so forth. But we live in an age, I think, when people like to use this phrase, my truth. Well, that's my truth. I wouldn't want somebody who adheres solely to my truth to be on a jury if I was the defendant. There is a truth. Yeah. There is a literal truth. And I think that your enormous contribution to this horrible event has been to do your level best to stand up for and to fill in the literal truth over the years.
I certainly try.
Questions? Should we turn to questions?
I think so.
Yeah, we're about
perfect
15
timing.
minutes. I think maybe this is the point to turn to questions.
She's going to read them. You can still write them if you haven't and you want to.
Okay, I'll put the questions to Ruth. Okay. All right. Mrs. Paine, this is from a man named Paul Amundsen. Mrs. Paine, I interviewed you for my book in 1998. I was a second grader at St. Mark's School of Texas in the fall of 1963. Could you share with the audience your memories of teaching Russian at St. Mark's in the summer of 1963? Bill Hootkins, who was later in the Star Wars movies, was your lone student.
That's right.
You taught him what a kopeck was. Paul Amundsen.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had studied and tried to learn Russian well enough, and I applied at St. Mark's for a summer course in '63 to have students, and one person signed up, and we went ahead and did it, you know. And it only lasted, of course, until the assassination, when my life was swept and everything changed. I saw Bill Hootkins' name in the credits recently of a movie that was shown at Friend's house where I live. He has since died, but he went on to act and do small town acting in the movies. Yeah, but he was very interested in drama. And, yeah.
More about your time in Irving. Please elaborate on your efforts with the West Irving Improvement Association. What kind of things did you do to further integration? Were there sit-ins, protests? And this one ends, thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I love to talk about this. There I was with 2 little kids and a husband who was living elsewhere, and I'm bored and I was thinking, what can I do? And I started a little preschool. I took a course right here, drove over to Dallas to study the Montessori method of teaching kids. And I wanted to try it, so we tried it. We tried it in West Irving. And this is a situation where, if you're new, you may not know that West Irving is a section of town where all the people who were black lived because they weren't allowed in town. There was a border. And they couldn't get county cards for library, things like that. And we were a sundowner town, you've heard of that. If you were black, you needed to be out of town by sundown. And things were changing in race relations, and I wanted a little grassroots way to help make that change. I'm disappointed that none of the people who went to that school are here tonight. I thought I would have some. What? There they are. What? Where? Oh, all right. Yay. Yeah, good. Come talk to me later. Yeah. It was really thrilling. And of course, what's happened is I've really been able to go ahead and live my life, which surprises me in a way, because I then went ahead and I was already active, as you understand, among Quakers. And I applied. Well, I tried to start a Montessori school in Philadelphia, where I was moving to from Irving, but I couldn't get the zoning. It was too big a deal. But I applied to be a principal at a small Quaker school right there in Philadelphia and got it. I worked there 4 years until such time as my daughter was too sick to continue in school, and we decided we needed a change of climate. And with my young son, 14, and my daughter, 15, we took a 25-foot sloop down the waterway to Florida. And so that was fun. Was it fun, yeah. Chris? And so, it hasn't all been sad story long all the time. And then I went back to school and became a school psychologist. I was always wondering, could we have known, could we have detected that Lee was a killer, that he was, that kind of anger and hostility existed there? I found out, no, we can't. That the only thing that really tells you what might happen is what has happened with what people do. And we didn't know. So then school psychologist was good. I went ahead and finished my career in education as a school psychologist in first North Florida and then in Tampa. So, okay.
Somebody asked, are you still in touch with Marina or her children?
Well, no. She reached out to me after she was called for the Warren Commission and had me come over to where she was staying with a friend. And she basically said, they're nice old men, they'll be kind to you, which I thought was nice because that said something about how they had treated her. Mm-hmm. And she was reassuring me because I was about to go to testify. And then in the fall of '64, she bought a house and invited me to come and see it and visit with the kids, and I did. And it was so sad to be together. The major thing we both had in common in our life was the assassination of Kennedy, and that was just too heavy a burden to the relationship. And so I did not follow up and try to invite her out. And I think that's worked for her too. She's left it behind as much as she can and raised two kids who are now grown. Two girls are now grown and married and I think have kids. One of my people here checks the internet for me and finds out. And so they're doing okay.
Here's a grim question that you can answer briefly. Were you ever afraid for your life?
I've been naive all my life, but I really, I can't say I was really afraid. Yeah. Which is a comfort. You know, I do feel a huge comfort. I feel the presence of my mother, who died in 67, and I feel safe. I feel what should happen will happen. And my job was just to be as open and honest as I could be, tell what I knew, and leave it there.
Ruth, someone asks, do you think Dallas being, quote, the city of hate, as it was sometimes called, because there was such fierce opposition to Kennedy, do you think that any of that motivated Oswald?
No. No, he saw an opportunity on Wednesday morning, and he fired the gun on Friday. Yeah.
And let's see, I think a lot of people want to talk to you. And I'm trying to.
Thank you for coming.
There's one here, and I don't want to tire you either. I'm sure you're tired already. But Ruth, you had a very busy summer in 1963. Can you give us a detailed account of your, not a detailed account, but, well, you request that, but can you give us an account of your summer trips, including New Orleans? Because I think that
Yes,
that is a crucial thing.
It is. And crucial to understanding is that I was separated from Michael. I was bored to tears with home, you know, doing the diapers and not much else. And kids, I have lovely kids, and they're great people to talk to now, but they weren't that exciting to talk to at that time. So I packed up a station wagon, and we drove east, visiting people as we went. I visited with my co-clerk of the East-West Contacts Committee of the Young Friends Committee of North America, which was planning an exchange of students, which we did. I wasn't part of that exchange, but I had to help plan it. And then went on to Philadelphia I had lovely, lovely in-laws. Then visited with my sister. I was with my sister in Bethesda, Maryland, the day of the March on Washington. She had two little kids, maybe there were three by then. And I had the two little kids, and they were just too little to take to a big crowd in downtown Washington. So we did not try to go. But we were very aware of the march and what it meant for civil rights and the changes that were happening. And then we drove on, a lot of driving that summer, drove on to Birmingham and stopped at the church. After the March on Washington, the church in Birmingham was bombed,
Street
and
church
four
bombing.
little girls were killed. And so we stopped to pay our respects, to leave a little donation, to say that we cared. We're sorry that it happened. And I felt like, well, I can't explain a mob of people in Washington Mall to my children for the march, I could say, this happened because that people were hating and bombed the church, and my kids could see the hole in the roof. Yeah. So.
And then in New Orleans itself, you stopped because that summer with Marina and Lee in New Orleans.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Get to where you were going.
Yeah, right.
I do get distracted.
And why were they in New Orleans?
Okay, well, he had looked for a job in the spring, and I figured now, I recognize that probably she urged him to go stay with relatives in New Orleans. He'd been born there, he had an aunt there and family, and this was after he had shot Walker. She urged him to leave town, and he did. And when I came to visit them, well, skipping fast, I had visited in the spring and learned that they were going there. And they weren't wealthy enough to have a telephone. And Lee said he would send a letter when he had a place for them to come to. And I said, well, I could help get Marina and the two babies there. Were there two? Yeah. And I lost it. I said, you know, let them come and stay at my house while you go and look for a place for them. Because I have a phone. You could call when you're ready to have them come, and I'll drive them over to New Orleans. So I had visited in New Orleans with them and then come back home. And then I said, yeah, I'll take them to New Orleans. So I did. Of course, station wagon, two little kids. I don't know if you remember anything about it. No.
And the really awful part of the journey home was you didn't know one of the items that was in the car that he had packed and put with everything.
Yes, I had no clue that he packed up all their stuff, basically, because he was leaving, too. He said he was going to look for somewhere. Nothing about that he was going to Mexico. And I learned that later. But, yeah, he packed everything up. He was really quite helpful. Then we started to go, and I had a soft tire, and the car was full of stuff. I unpacked it all, went and bought a tire to replace, packed up, and then started across and came back to
And one of the things in the car was the rifle.
It has to have been.
Yes.
Yeah, and there were two large Marine duffel bags standing this high. Could easily have put a full-fledged rifle. It wouldn't have even had to be broken down to fit in there. So, yeah, looking back, it has to have been there.
Yeah. And he, and maybe we'll end with this, he was not shy about asking for favors sometimes. And one of the extraordinary things he did on the Saturday after the assassination, when he was in the Dallas City Jail, he called.
Yeah.
And what did he want?
Well, he called. First he wanted to speak to Marina, and I said, no, she's not here. Well, she should be there. You know, well, I don't know where she is. But he called and wanted me to contact a man named John Apt, who had acted as a lawyer for the Communist Party, the American Communist Party. And he gave me a phone number. This is Saturday, the day after the assassination. And so the phone rang. I dialed, I did as he asked, and rang up the phone, but nobody answered, which was not really a surprise. Mm-hmm.
But he was still willing to be helped by you a
yes,
day
exactly.
after he had upended your own life. Yeah.
Right, yeah.
And I think I'll just end with one question.
Okay.
Fundamentally, as we look back from this great distance, 60 years, I mean, we are now just about as far from President Kennedy's assassination as Kennedy's killing was from President McKinley's, which is really hard to believe since McKinley seems like, the distant past. I mean, McKinley had been in the Civil War as a soldier. But do you think that the assassination fundamentally was more a psychological crime than it was a political crime? Meaning it grew from Oswald's psychology more than from any ideology he had picked up?
Well, I think he thought more in, he didn't have the ideology. He wasn't a studied Marxist and so on. You mentioned a picture of him holding the newspapers. It was the Militant and the Daily Worker with two different communist groups that hated each other, but he wasn't politically enough astute to know that. So, he just, his life wasn't going well at all.
Yeah.
He wanted to be a big shot, and he was not.
Yeah. All right. I think, again, you've done what you've done for many decades, which is try to speak the truth as you experienced it and as it happened, to be as helpful as possible.
And you wrote it up beautifully, and I have this privilege of being able to say, when people ask me questions about it, I say, I'd rather not really talk about it. Why don't you read this book by Tom Mallon? And they do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.